Hi there. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing for a fairly rare book that I will probably be making an audiobook version of in the near future. I got this book from a New Zealand-based bookseller, although the transaction was denominated in British pounds, and it worked out to roughly $120 Canadian. It was, I believe, 75 British pounds, and the packaging marks it as being valued at approximately 100 New Zealand dollars. Not sure if that's strictly accurate on the final one, but all in all, fairly close. Pretty pricey. So let's continue. The supplier has placed a little cover slip over the shipping label, which reads, "Wherever in the world you are, there are always hard-to-find books." And they have their website there, hardtofindbooks.co.New Zealand. And they say hard to find, but worth the effort. And I'd say they're not wrong. I mean, in the case of this particular book, well, quite frankly, I looked online for like a free PDF copy, nothing. I tried, all the usual suspects as far as book suppliers, again, nothing. The only company I could find that was supplying it was this one. And yeah, they charged a pretty penny. So, and now that we finally have the wrapping all off, we reveal an original copy of the Handbook of Intelligence and Guerilla Warfare by Alexander Orlov. Now, I'd first heard about this, I think, oddly enough, via some kind of Facebook post in a group, and somebody had posted up a name of the book, and I looked it up, and sure enough, I found it oddly intriguing. I thought, oh my, this is something I need to read. And then I did a little more research, and I managed to find a review on the CIA's own website, which I'll read in a moment. The review for the book on the CIA's website states as follows. Book review of Handbook of Intelligence and Guerilla Warfare by Alexander Orlov. CIA Historical Review Program. Release in full 22nd of September 1993. Soviet Intelligence. Handbook of Intelligence and Guerilla Warfare by Alexander Orlov. Ann Arbor, University of Michigan Press, 1963. 187 pages, originally sold at $4 a unit. Considering how much I paid, that's rather painful. Anyway, continuing. Any observant layman who follows the details of Soviet intelligence operations in the press soon finds that they all have one common factor. Each Soviet operation, wherever mounted and whatever its target, has a single goal: obtaining classified documents from the files of other governments. The Soviet government wants documents. It has little interest in opinion, although it will accept the considered judgment of experts who are its agents. It does collect overt information in great quantity also, but its principal interest remains the classified files of other governments. The Soviet regime puts first things first. Alexander Orlov, a ranking officer of Soviet state security who commanded the NKVD in Spain until his defection in 1938, drives this point home. It is the principal theme of his book. It is a fact that the American intelligence officer should never forget. Orlov declares that the purpose of his book is to recreate an espionage handbook that he once composed for the Soviets back in 1936. Fortunately for us, however, he has done no such thing. Instead, he has made a survey of Soviet intelligence practice, especially as it relates to the role of the illegal or deep cover agent, using his wide past experience to analyze current Soviet techniques. Could his understanding of the illegal's fears and difficulties in foreign parts derive from his own personal experience? The result is, in any case, of the greatest value to the layman and quite useful to the intelligence expert. The central theme of Soviet preoccupation with documents, however, remains Orlov's most significant contribution. This Soviet preoccupation must be impressed upon the American intelligence officer, who, in all likelihood, has been overtrained in the relative insignificance of covert information. American students of intelligence work, usually they are scholars and therefore committed to research, take pleasure in stressing that clandestine collection of information plays a rather minor role in the aggregate activity. The finished intelligence product, they say, usually contains not more than 10% of clandestine data. Then they try to smooth the clandestine operator's ruffled feelings by admitting that it is an important 10% just the same. In Orlov's opinion, this Western reliance on overt information often leads to unprovable hypotheses and at the worst to wild leaps into the unknown. In contrast to the 10% maximum of clandestine intelligence in the American end product, he declares that the Soviet Military Intelligence Service, which does use some overt materials, puts 80% of its effort into secret operations, while Soviet state security relies entirely on clandestine techniques. Orlov clearly does not approve of American intelligence practices. Although the book is a contribution to our literature, the intelligence officer will read it with some regret. Few officers who have left the Soviet service can match Orlov's knowledge of its operations, techniques, and personalities. His knowledge of its history and development up to the late 30s is unsurpassed. Because of Stalin's purges and of losses in the war, few men like him who grew up with Soviet intelligence remain. It is unfortunate, therefore, that he avoids giving his American audience any insight into the service during the campaign against Trotsky and the Great Purges. His detailed comments on it and its leading personalities during these fateful years would prove invaluable. Sensationalized accounts, such as his own History of Stalin's Secret Crimes, cannot meet this need. The reader will put down the book with the hope that someday Orlov will tell his own experiences and give us the story of Soviet intelligence as he knows it. The weakest section of this book is the final chapter on guerrilla warfare. Here, the dated quality of Orlov's information is most clearly shown. His elementary generalizations on guerrilla activity are drawn from personal experience limited solely to the Russian and Spanish civil wars. Soviet guerrilla experiences in World War II, which importantly influenced present-day guerrilla doctrine, is covered in only a page or two. Post-war guerrilla activities are not mentioned at all. Regrettably, the handbook has neither index nor bibliography. Interesting to note, my copy, I believe, does, so perhaps mine is not in fact an original. We shall see. Continuing, though. The Soviet High Command, A Military Political History, 1918 to 1941, by John Erickson, New York, St. Martin's Press, 1962, 889, that's total page length, and originally sold for $15. So this appears to be a review for a separate book tacked on to the same page of the CIA's website. I'll read it anyway. When he submitted his manuscript for publication, the author of this book could not know that approaching events would give it a unique timeliness. One of his principal themes is the basic and continuing conflict between the Soviet armed services and the power complex centering on the State Security Service. This struggle first developed in the days of Trotsky. It reached dramatic intensity when Marshal Tukhachevsky fell. Butchered that name, pardon me. Since the Second World War, the rise and fall of military personalities has revealed discontent in the armed services. Now the treason of Lieutenant Colonel Oleg Pankovsky has thrown an embarrassing light on the struggle between these forces. Erickson's books permit intelligence officers to study the background and development of this conflict. The author, who did his research while a fellow of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, discusses the history of the Soviet Army between the outbreak of the revolution and the German invasion of 1941. This is not a history of Soviet military institutions, but rather a discussion of the impact of the Soviet armed forces on internal politics, internal developments, and leading Soviet personalities. 2 lengthy chapters are devoted to the military purges of 1937, their immediate causes, and their complex effects on Soviet and world affairs. Indeed, the theme of the purges, their origins, and their effect on Soviet military policy are a major element of the book, although he cannot fully explain the military holocaust. No one can in the present state of our knowledge. Erickson performs a useful service in summarizing the events of 1937 to 1938, stripping away some of the more improbable interpretations of events and placing the purge in the perspective of its time. This perspective helps us to understand the developments of the Pankovsky affair. All right. Historical document posted May 8, 2007 at 7:54 a.m. Last updated July 23, 2008 at 12:53 p.m. No mention of the time zone for that, but such is scarcely relevant. Anyway, so that is the review of the Handbook of Intelligence and Guerrilla Warfare by Alexander Orlov, which is denoted on the United States Central Intelligence Agency's website. I will enclose the link to that in the description. Continuing now. So after reading that review, I decided, okay, I absolutely must have a copy of this book. And yet, no PDFs available for free, no audiobook, nada. This thing is like basically persona non grata. No matter where I looked, I couldn't find it. And then finally, one company in New Zealand was selling, I think, 3 or 4 original copies. Not even reprints, original copies, and that's all they had. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, not cheap, but I don't really have a choice. So here at last we are. Now, I will be likely recording an audiobook version of this sometime in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. And with that, I bid you adieu. Auf Wiedersehen.